Welcome to the NextGen Planners podcast. NextGen Planners is a financial planning community with a supportive membership that strives for inclusion and shares best practice throughout our profession and the industry as a whole. This podcast is designed to support your always learning mentality by gathering insights from inside and outside of financial services. So sit back and enjoy.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the NextGen Planners podcast. And I'm delighted to say that I'm joined in conversation today by Chris Budd. And Chris probably needs very little introduction, but I'm going to do a little introduction anyway before I bring Chris in. So Chris is the founder of the Institute for Financial Wellbeing, presenter on the Financial Wellbeing podcast, and now the author of two, not just one, two books on financial wellbeing. So Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Adam. I'd like to think that I've been involved with NextGen not only from the start, but possibly even slightly before the start. So I'm a massive fan of what you guys do.
Well, thank you. And, we really appreciate the fact that you've taken some time out of what is a really busy time for you, the launch of a new book and a number of other
You'd be surprised.
super projects. So it's a delight to have you on the show. And, I've already plugged it twice. And, I think that for me, freshest thinking is really great. And so you've written a follow-up to the original Financial Wellbeing book. Tell me a little bit about it and tell me what prompted you to think that actually it's time.
So it's called The Four Cornerstones of Financial Wellbeing. And what prompted it is just researching the topic of happiness and its relationship to money since writing the original book. The original book was How to Create a Financial Plan to Be Happy, not just wealthy. This is much more deep dive into all the psychology, the philosophy, the religious, what we know from religions about happiness, and bringing it all together in one overriding model. In many ways, I find it quite fascinating that all of this has been around, in the case of religion, for thousands of years. And there's been massive academic research over the last few decades, and yet nobody's been applying this to the financial planning process. So that's really what this book does. It applies all of that to the financial planning process.
Interesting stuff. And you mentioned that nobody has been applying it. Why do you think that might be?
Because we focus on money, because financial advice is advising on finances. It's also because it's a very new profession. We haven't had to think about money and financial planning in the terms that we currently do ever, really, up until about 40 years ago. Because in the 19th century and for millennia beyond that, people didn't live to an age beyond working. If they did, they stayed with their families. Then when the Industrial Revolution happened, capitalism comes in, then employers start to offer pension schemes, government pension schemes start to kick in. It's only really in the 80s when Margaret Thatcher brought in the personal pension, Robert Maxwell fell off his boat, all the company pension schemes shut down, and we were handed the response. Oh, and of course, life expectancy massively increased over the last century. So suddenly there is a period of 10, 15, 20 years, maybe more, that we don't have any income and we have to look after ourselves. At the same time, we weren't given any education on how to do that. This is the evidence for this, my proof for this is the existence of financial planning. Financial planning is really only a decade or two old. Financial advice before that really only started to come about properly in the 90s, 80s and 90s. It hasn't been needed. So consequently, we're a very new profession and we're learning. So this is what we think of as the latest iteration. Financial wellbeing is, if financial advice was version 1 and financial planning was version 2, financial wellbeing is version 3. We're developing what we do. So there's nothing wrong with the fact we haven't done it before, but it's just a natural process of the development of the profession, I think.
Interesting. And this is a follow-up from the original book, but it takes a different stance, doesn't it? And it's actually, whereas the first book was a book that you could almost complete. You had to take a pen out and start filling it in, didn't you? You could complete it at an airport waiting for a flight or on a flight even. It was a great tool for that. But this is a more in-depth dive. So tell me what prompted you to change the format and go down this different route of writing.
So let me tell you about set point theory, because this will answer the question. It's a bit of a long-winded answer, Adam, forgive me, but
I'll settle in, Chris.
So set point theory is a well-known psychological theory about how we go through life with a set level of happiness. So we all have our own set level. We'll all know somebody who just seems happy being miserable. We probably all know somebody who will walk into a room and just light it up with their joie de vivre. So we all have our own set level of well-being. And what happens as we go through life is something will happen to you and make you feel happy. And so you'll just rise above your set level of well-being. But that's temporary because you get used to the thing, or you forget the thing that made you happy, and you go back down to your set level. And something might make you sad. You stub your toe, or you read something terrible in the news, and you go below your set level of well-being. But again, you get used to it, or you forget it, and you tend to come back up. And so we oscillate around our set level of well-being as we go through life. One little aside, by the way, when we go above, that's great. We feel happy. And so we don't want to change that. We don't take any action. But when we go below, that's not very nice. We don't like feeling below our set point and feeling sad. So we take action. And what action do we take? We buy stuff. There's even a name for it, retail therapy. So retail therapy is also called the hedonic treadmill. The phrase I like to use is that we're all financial well-being junkies, buying short-term hits of happiness to keep us up to our set level. Now, where does your set level come from? Researchers did think that it was 100% inherited. So when you get to your adult life, you've got your set level, and that doesn't tend to change very much. And you can't do much about it. It's just inherited within you. But more recent research by a lady called Sonia Lyubomirsky suggests that actually 50% of it is in your DNA, is inherited. 10% of your set level of happiness is your circumstances, how much you own, where you live, your friends, etc., etc. And 40%, the remaining 40%, is your intentional activity. What you say, what you do, how you react. So when I discovered this, it was an absolute light bulb moment, because what we're doing with financial advice and financial planning is we're focusing on only 10% of somebody's long-term well-being. Whereas if we could educate them about what brings us joy, the sources of happiness, we can actually work on the other 40%. So if a financial advisor makes their client 50% richer through their advice, and they get a bigger house and all the stuff that goes with it, you're going to increase their overall well-being by just 5%. But if you also work on their approach to money, their attitude to money, and understanding the sources of joy and the relationship of money with it, then you could actually increase the overall well-being by 25%. So all this time, I think we've been looking at the wrong place by just focusing on the money. If we can focus on the well-being as well, then we can massively increase the impact of financial planning. And so that's the core of the book.
I like that. It brings it into context, doesn't it? And thinking about all that time and effort that we spend thinking about money. Does it therefore necessarily follow, of course, that if we lose all of the client's money, they only feel 10% less happy than their set point?
Yeah, if you've, I guess it does. Yeah. I mean, if you look, have you ever met an unhappy Buddhist monk? You know, Buddhist monks don't have anything at all, but they're the happiest people on the planet. So the relationship between money and happiness needs to be understood and to a point broken, because if we understand the sources of joy and the sources of happiness, we understand that, money can make a difference. So more money can make you more happy, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that way if we change our intentional activity. So,
Fantastic. So Lennon and McCartney were certainly onto something then, Chris. So what was the most challenging chapter to write then?
It's all challenging. I've written 6 books now, and I've got a 7th on the go, another novel. And there always comes a point in time where you go, this is rubbish. What am I doing? I'm an idiot. I'm imposter syndrome I just live with permanently. I loved investigating self-determination theory a lot more, because I came up with a model for why we're not good with money and how we can be better with money. And that was a real revelatory moment, but that took quite a lot of reading. I've read quite a lot of research papers over the last 4 years. Actually, that's not true. I've read a lot of executive summaries of research papers. And so getting into some of that stuff is quite challenging, but actually that's the most rewarding bit, because that's the way life works, right? The more challenging it is, it tends to be the more rewarding.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the parts of the book that I read, and I have to admit, I haven't read it all yet because it was snatched away from me and taken to South Africa before I could actually get to the end. So it's already well traveled. But the parts I did read, what I noticed is that the book is actually focused quite a lot on financial planners and what financial planners can do. There are some really useful tips elements in the book, and you highlight the tips for financial planners. So tell me what the thinking behind that was.
Well, so there's a tip all the way through with an appendix, which is just for financial planners to read. And I said to my wife, when I sold Ovation back in 2018, and she was kind of, well, what's next? I said, I'm going to change the financial advice profession. And I didn't realize as the words come out of my mouth just how pompous it sounded, and but I mean it. I generally want to create this idea of financial well-being is version 3, because if financial advisors are really only advising the money and not advising the person, they could actually be making people less happy. And what's the point of that? You could be creating a financial plan that helps somebody become wealthier, but by focusing only on the money, you could be making them less happy. If the things that they're getting are external motivation type things, then that could actually be making them less happy. So that's not going to make the world a happier place. So if we're going to have real impact on the world, then I think financial planners are a huge opportunity to do that. We're a massive profession, absolutely huge. And yet we just give the message out that more money makes you more happy. And that's just simply not the case. That the narrative of money and success is money, and that's just not right. So it's a place to start, I guess, to try and help people to be happier, not just wealthier.
Fantastic. And you mentioned this ambition to change the financial planning profession, and we all know, Christopher, that's a big old task. And so what was it about the financial planning profession that was the catalyst for that then?
There's several answers to that. I've been in it all my life, and because I'm an old git, I've seen some of the really terrible stuff that some of your young advisors wouldn't believe. But I guess ultimately, I would have to go back to my father, who was a financial advisor. And my father went bankrupt when I was in my 20s. And I was involved with that eventually. He didn't tell the family because he didn't want to worry anybody. And time came where he couldn't conceal it any longer. And it destroyed him, completely destroyed him as an individual. He'd been in the world of finance and thought that having nice things that you could show off to people were going to be his source of pride. I was actually sat on a beach in a village on the south coast called Beer when reading a book by the Dalai Lama when this hit me. It absolutely overwhelmed me. It was only about 3 years ago. And I realized that what had happened to my dad is that his self-worth had been equated to his net worth. That all of his self-worth and pride came from external factors of the approval of other people. He had to buy something to show off that he was doing well for himself in order that other people would see him in a certain light, which is what then gave him his pride. When he went bankrupt, it was all taken away from him. So, and the people in our village didn't react very nicely to him either. And so they moved out of the village, lost the house, lost everything. And he was a different man. He's a broken man. And so I guess I just did two things. Firstly, I decided I wasn't going to be a victim of life like my dad was. And secondly, I decided I could do something to help other people with this. And so I started my own business, and that started the journey off. But that event, that big, meaningful event, is a major, major catalyst to my thinking and approach to life and how I've seen money make people very unhappy.
Oh, thanks for sharing that, Chris. And what do you think your dad would say about all of the things that you've done in financial well-being now then, and the attempts to move the dial?
I don't think you'll understand. If I'm absolutely honest. I think sometimes people are too entrenched in the old narrative. He came along with me to a certain point, but the extent of it now, I think he would. He was an open-minded guy. He certainly would approve. Whether he'd get it or not, I'm not quite so sure.
Yeah, well, I think that story brought a couple of things out there. Of course, is that so much of our feelings towards money come from our experiences and those of previous generations, and also I'm having a conversation with a man who used a sentence that involved the village green, a pint, and reading a book by the Dalai Lama. So I think that gives us a little insight into the way that your life works. So tell me a little bit about your happiest moments then. What are the days for you, and what are you doing in those days that actually bring you most happiness?
So happiness comes from intrinsic motivations, from doing things that give you meaning and purpose, that are probably quite hard to explain. So in some ways, your question is a cheeky one, because I'm going to find it difficult to explain it. But I will give you one really good example. So one of my passions in life is music. And I've recently started kind of not really a business, it's a hobby of selling records at fairs, at the local markets. And I'm doing this not because I want to make money from selling records. In fact, quite the opposite. Most of the good ones end up in my own collection. But one of my great heroes in life is Joan Armatrading, a singer, a songwriter, particularly her 70s output, 80s her pop output was great too. And in fact, the Ovation is named after the make of guitar that Joan Armatrading plays. If your listeners wanted to check her out, then Love and Affection is her most famous song. But For the Boys, if there's any guitarists out there, listen to For the Boys by Joan Armatrading on YouTube, and it will blow your mind. She's a brilliant guitarist. So one of the things that I like to do is I brought a whole load of copies of her eponymous album, Joan Armatrading, with Love and Affection and For the Boys on it. And I give it away to people who are just discovering music. So I'll tell you a very quick story. One of the first markets I did, a bloke bought a copy of Ziggy Stardust from me, and his daughter was stood next to him. I'm guessing she's 13, 14, curly hair coming down over her eyes. She's got a Pink Floyd T-shirt on. And I gave the guy his record, and I said, I'd take it to the girl. I take it, you're into music? She said, yeah. So I reached back and I gave her a copy of Joan Armatrading, and I said, you need that in your life. Dad went, whoa, how much? I said, no, that's free. This is why I'm doing this record stall. And I said to the girl, that's free for you on the grounds that you have to come back and tell me what you think of it. And she'd go, okay. About 3 months later, I'm there again. And halfway through the morning, I look up and I see this girl standing there. And I said, I know you. Well, and she went, I loved it. That is where I get my joy from. So sharing music, spreading the love of music, playing in the band Consumer Duty that some people might know. I think we're at the PFS Festival actually. Not because being in a band is a really good example. I'm not on stage because I want applause. I'm on stage playing the guitar in a band because I want to see people having a good time, knowing that I'm part of that. That's the difference between an intrinsic and an extrinsic motivation right there. So that's another example of it.
Fantastic. What a great story. And I know that recently you've taken to the water as well. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, we were going to be moving house away from Bristol, but we love Bristol, a lot of our friends here. So buying a second property isn't really something I would do. But we wanted somewhere to stay when we come to Bristol. So we bought a barge, which is on the docks in Bristol. We haven't actually moved away from Bristol just yet, but we will be doing. And that's our little bolt hole. And it's just the most lovely, lovely place to just sit on a summer's evening at the back of the barge. We've got a great spot in the docks, just looking across the water to the cottage pub and what have you. Yeah, it's a beautiful spot. We love it.
So anybody who's in Bristol of an evening and hears Joan Armatrading dancing in the wind, then they'll know where to find you then, Chris. Is that how it works? Well,
sort of. It'll be her records because I'm not good enough a guitarist to play what she can play, unfortunately. But I have got a guitar on the boat as well. So, yeah, it's a nice spot.
Fantastic. So, of course, this isn't the only thing that you've done in the space of financial well-being. This is a Financial Wellbeing podcast. And if anybody, I can't believe that anybody listening to this won't have already listened to the Financial Wellbeing podcast. Tell me about the guests that you've had on and just what you've enjoyed most about that.
So we've had we've got two different types of episodes. We have ones where I write a script, although it's a fairly loose script. People talk, David and Tomo talk around it. But I love those because I get to research a new area. So what I've got to write is on the area of permission, for example, which is a fascinating subject matter and a massive relevance to money. Some of my favourite guests, your listeners will know Nick Elston only too well. So I interviewed him back in 2020, actually, the second time. The first one I did for him, I'm just looking up the date. It was quite a long time ago, because I've known Nick a long time. That first episode with Nick is absolutely fantastic. I've listened to it myself about 5 times. It is so insightful. So I absolutely love that one. Neil Page has been on there loads of times. He's been brilliant. But you know how your favorite thing is always your latest thing. I did an interview with Olympic diver Leon Taylor, and that one's coming out very soon. And that was one of my absolute favorite interviews because it's around the subject of financial goals. Ever since I trained to be a business coach back in 2013, I've had a bee in my bonnet about the idea of goals. We're so fixated on the subject of goals because you see the tips of successful people always have a goal and so on and so forth. Well, I remember one client that we had who had £10 million in his current account from the sale of a business. And he was bereft in life because his goal had been attaining financial security. But once he'd achieved it, he didn't know what to do with himself because he'd never thought beyond the goal. And that's the danger of goals, is you get to that goal, then what? Your goal might be early retirement. Great, let's get you to the age of 55. You can retire at 55. Then what? Well, in the case of the Olympics, the Olympic gold medal, or any medal, obviously, is the objective. But then what? And famously, Michael Phelps won 8 gold medals at the Sydney Olympics and then had a nervous breakdown. And a lot of Olympic medalists report that the period after they've achieved the thing they've worked for all their life is actually a very unhappy time. Now, Leon Taylor, I won't say too much about his story because better to listen to the podcast, but he had exactly this experience and he's brilliant at explaining the danger of goals. Now, when it comes to finances, same thing. What's your cash flow helping somebody to achieve? And let me give you an example here. If your cash flow forecast is helping somebody to, let's take the classic trope of wealth, the yacht, right? So your cash flow forecast will help your client to buy a yacht. But what you should then ask is another question. When you get the yacht, then what happens? To find out, not just setting a goal, but what's the motivation behind it? One person might say, well, when I get my yacht, I'll take it down to wherever you live in the country. You'll have an equivalent of Salcombe down in the southwest or some posh place where posh people go with their posh boats. I'll take it down to Salcombe and I'll sit in the marina with my glass of champagne on the back and I'll say hello to all the wealthy people because that's my set. Now, research tells us that will make you less happy than you would otherwise be because you're seeking your self-worth from your net worth, from the approval of others. And therefore, you can never attain it because it's always the other side of somebody else's approval. Somebody else might say, well, when I get the yacht, I'm going to take it down to the local reservoir or the local lake where it will stay because I used to sail when I was younger and that's my passion, it's my sport. That's where my social life is. And when my kids come home at the weekends, they come down with me and we go out sailing on the... They are much more intrinsic motivations and they are far more likely to make you happy. So your cash flow forecast, if it's just focused on a goal, it could be making clients less happy, not more. So financial goals are really, really, really dangerous, I think. We need to look well beyond them. And that all came from, asked me about the podcast, a brilliant interview with this guy, Leon Taylor, and his experience of the Olympics, and now as a mentor to people like Tom Daly, where he talks about this stuff.
Fantastic. So I definitely recommend everybody check out the Financial Wellbeing podcast if you're one of the few that hasn't already, of course. And Chris, you mentioned earlier, and something that I wanted to pick up because I'm keen to learn more about you as well, because we sort of see a lot of the public face of the work that you do, but the stuff that sits behind it. And you've mentioned reading books of the Dalai Lama, you've mentioned Buddhist monks. Is Buddhism something that's had an influence on your thinking regarding financial wellbeing?
Yeah, it's had an influence on everything in life. I'm very late to it. It's only been the last few years. I've done a few courses on Buddhism. And I started meditation about 18 months ago. And it's had a big impact on my thinking. Firstly, in two ways. The Buddhism, I love the philosophy of it. Buddha was a guy that sat down in a grove of trees 2,500 years ago and worked it all out. And what he worked out is really amazing, but also really simple. And it has massive application to the lives that we live today. And then the meditation, I would just talk a little bit about meditation, because I come to meditation from a Buddhist perspective. A lot of Western meditation, I would say, sounds to me a bit more like mindfulness, about slowing down the mind. Buddhism is more about slowing down the mind in order to focus on things. It took me ages to get the hang of meditation. Not that I've got the hang of it now, but I was 5 minutes, right? 3 to 4 months. I was only doing 5 minutes at a time. And then one day I just kind of started meditating, telling my thoughts to just politely or unpolitely disappear. And then I kind of opened my eyes. It was 20 minutes had gone by. And now I'm starting to get there. But what I love about meditation is that it gives you a chance to sort out your thoughts, to watch your thoughts, to observe your thoughts, and then to go, okay, so nothing's really happening now. Now I'll choose one thing to think about. And that one thing could be very, very simple, like what is kindness or something like that. And then just take your time over it. And it's a refreshing thing, but it is an active mental activity. It's not just switching off. And I'm not any sort of expert on it whatsoever, and I'm not particularly good at it, but that's done a huge amount of benefit for me in just calming things down and just keeping things in control when things might feel a little out of control, as life always does at times.
So that's really fascinating, Chris. And is it something that you'd recommend that other people look more into? Everybody should do it, not just try it. I saw I've heard people say, I've had a go at it, it's not for me. That's just not right. It's for everybody, but it does take work. So if somebody says it's not really for me, it's because you haven't been doing it for long enough. It's like saying exercise isn't really for me. Meditation is mental exercise, and it will benefit everybody. And I really would. But be careful where you get your learning from. So there's a book called, I forget what the book's called, it's Geelong Thumpton is the author of the book. And it's, I think it's called something like How to Be Happy or something, a study of meditation. And that was wonderful for me. There's a few of the more American guru types. There's one called 10% Happier. I'm really not a fan of, because they reject all of the Buddhist thinking and just go, this is how to slow your mind down. Yeah, for me, that's taking all the good bits out and just leaving, a little bit. So for me, the full Buddhist approach, without having to become a monk or go on a retreat or anything like that, you're only talking 10, 50 minutes, 3 or 4 times a week. That's all it needs to be. But it will make such a huge difference to your mental health and just the ability to cope with things. That's brilliant. Thank you. So there's the podcast, the book, of course, all of the work that you did as a founder of the Institute for Financial Wellbeing. What's next, Chris?
I really want to open a record shop. I keep getting buying collections of records. So, hey, listeners, if anybody's got records or parents who've got collections of records they want to sell, let me know, because I'm buying. But it's always been a little ambition to own a record shop, and that possibility is actually coming closer. So I might do it, but I suspect that's not quite what you were getting at. Look, there's so much to be done, and I realise that sometimes when you can be 5 or 6 steps along the journey, you forget to talk in the language of the first step. And there's a lot of people out there who don't really know what financial well-being is. Not helped by some companies slapping financial well-being onto their marketing without actually changing any of their practices. So let's just go back to the very beginning, if I may, Adam. Financial well-being is the study of the relationship between money and happiness. Right, that's it. Now, it's not even a definition, really. It's a broadest possible definition. And it's not just about debt and budgeting and managing your money, although that is part of it. I would call that financial resilience. It's not about vulnerability, although that is part of it. It's about all of the stuff. And so sometimes when you talk about everything, you can talk about nothing. So very specifically, it means understanding where happiness comes from and what is money's part to play in that. And it does have a part to play. There's no point in pretending it doesn't. Does money make us happy? Yeah, if you've got no money or nothing to eat, then having some money and something to eat will make you happy. But if I give Bill Gates $10, it's not going to make him any more happy. So it depends on your circumstances. So getting back to some simplicity stuff, I love talking about self-determination theory and set point theory, all these things. I love all of that. But actually, let's just get to the beginning of just when you're sitting with a client, try not speaking. Try asking an open question like, what makes you happy? Or where does purpose come in your life? And then don't say anything for 10 minutes. Even if the client stops talking, just sit there and smile benignly. They will open up to you. So even if we just start with some simple stuff like that, the work is a long way from being done because we still need so many people to start on that first step. There's some on the third step, some on the seventh step with me. There's people all along the way. So I've got to make sure that I keep helping people on each part of that journey.
That's super. So the book itself is the 4 cornerstones of financial wellbeing. And tell us a little bit about the 4 cornerstones, Chris. But I'm also interested because I know that you are always reading and always learning. So toward the end of your explanation, maybe let us into some insights in terms of whether or not you think there's a possible 5th cornerstone or beyond in the pipeline.
Oh, crikey. Okay, so the 4 cornerstones are the things that make us all happy, the things that will make you happy, the barriers that are common to us all, and the barriers that are unique to you. So just go over those again. The things that make us all happy, if you get a hug from a loved one, anybody will feel good for that. If you achieve something that you've striven, don't know what that word is, hard to achieve, then that will make anybody happy. For you, that might be cycling something or winning a race. For me, it might be teaching kids at cricket or giving a Joe Number trading record to a 13-year-old who loves it. So that's different for each of us. That's what I would call know thyself. So that's the things that are common to all of us, the things that are unique to each of us. Then we have the barriers that are common to all of us. So loss aversion, for example, some of the behavioral biases are common of everybody. And then there are the barriers that are individual to each of us. So somebody may have had an event in their childhood that means that they have a bad relationship with money. Maybe they don't think they deserve to have money, or maybe somebody thinks they do deserve to have money. Either way, that's what we would call a self-limiting belief. So those are the 4 areas. And the role of the financial planner, I think, is to educate on the general truths and to help the client know thyself on what makes them happy and what are their personal barriers. So the education bit can come in the form of, giving them a book, maybe, or writing articles or in your newsletters. And in a client meeting, if somebody is exhibiting, for example, a very strong endowment effect where they are struggling to let go of an old life in favor of a new life, tell them what endowment effect is. Educate them. This isn't a secret here. This isn't something that we're trying to keep to ourselves. This is something that we're trying to spread the news around. And then the second part is to, like I say, ask open questions and be quiet. Go and get training and coaching skills. I guess, if anything, if you want another pillar to it, and I don't think I want to add another pillar to it, but the use of listening and questioning skills is something I've been talking about for the last decade. Ever since I did my own training, it was just a light bulb. Well, why aren't we applying this in a client meeting? There's one of my favorite statistics is 95% of people consider themselves to be above average drivers. And in a similar vein, 95% of advisors tend to think they're quite good listeners. We're not. We're not trained to be. We're trained to find solutions. So that would probably be another area. It's not a new area. It's what I've been talking about for ages, but that would probably be another area I could spend a lot of time writing about.
Very good. So we're getting toward the end of our conversation now, Chris. Our time is nearly up today, but I'd like to ask you if you could advise our audience to do one thing just one thing to move the dial on their own personal financial well-being, what would it be?
Understand the difference between internal and external self-worth. So one of the early chapters in the book is about there are 3 steps to happiness, 3 steps to a better relationship with money. You start with step 2. Step 2 is understanding that joy comes from internal sources, not external sources. If you're like my dad, getting your sense of pride from people being impressed with what you do and what you own, then you've got to continually chase it. Whereas if your joy and pride comes from stuff that you do that you don't need to tell anybody about, then that's long lasting and in your control. Step 3, well, where does that come from? I'll quote the Dalai Lama phrase here, which is having a warm heart, which is a lovely principle for life. It's kindness. It's, that kind of it. It's kindness. It's helping others, whether it's coaching cricket or whether it's what you do brilliantly through NextGen. You have massive meaning and purpose in what you do, Adam. These are all internal sources of joy. So when you've done that, now you can go back to step 1 and start your financial plan. Because now your financial plan will be aiming to achieve those things. But only when you know those things can you start your financial plan. So there's one thing I would do is understand that joy comes from internal sources, from meaning and purpose. Accept that, and then you'll see it everywhere, and you'll look for it everywhere with clients, and you'll look for it in your own life as well.
That's a great tip, Chris. Thank you. And, well, we normally like to wrap up with a book recommendation. But we know which book we're going to be recommending during this episode, don't we? So what are you reading at the moment?
I've got so many books that I can recommend on this particular topic. The one that stands head and shoulders above all the others is called The Book of Joy. As a transcript, or not quite transcript, it's a write-up of a conversation that happened over the course of the week at the Dalai Lama's 80th birthday. The Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu got together for the purpose to discuss what is joy. So they're absolutely hilarious together. There's a documentary on it as well that you can, if you prefer to see, although the book goes into much more detail. And the two of them are hilarious. They're kind of being a bit cheeky to each other, but oh boy, do they deliver some insights from Christianity and from Buddhism. It's agnostic. It's not interested in the religious aspect of it. It's interested in the philosophy of it. And it's got a line, for example, from Archbishop Desmond Tutu when he says, "Joy is your reward for the giving of joy." They make the argument that being kind is selfish because it makes you happy. What a wonderful principle. It's absolutely amazing. So that book would, from a more philosophical point of view, would be definitely my book recommendation.
Fantastic. Thank you. And of course, Chris's book, The 4 Cornerstones of Financial Wellbeing, is available at Amazon and all good book stockists. But it's just come to me now to say, Chris, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. It's always a pleasure. That hasn't been any different here today. So thank you once again.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. I appreciate it. And you guys keep up the good work. We love what you do.